Welcome to the With a Dog podcast, the podcast for the modern dog parent. I don't know if I should do some intro or something, but I feel like I'm just going to get right into it. This is Starsky's episode. My best boy, my goodest boy. He was just a wonderful dog. And I don't know how recording this is going to go, honestly. This is going to be more like an audio diary, I feel like, because I have no idea if I'm going to be in tears or not while recording this. So, as things go, Starsky died about 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago. He was my heart dog. I'm not a huge fan of the term heart dog, although after losing Starsky, I like it better. I used to use and have used the word soul dog, and I kind of like that term because there's like a soul connection. I'll often say he's my soul dog. I love Ginsburg, and I love Ginsburg just as much. It's not about the amount of love. There's always more room for love. It's about this special connection, just this like deep soul to soul connection, I guess, or you could say heart to heart, hence heart dog. Anyway, since he has died, I thought we would start with his death and kind of get that story out of the way and then move on to the more important part, which was his life. I also I don't feel a ton of guilt, but it's hard not to feel guilt when you put a dog down. I feel a lot less guilty than with Kiki because Starsky was older and he was not well physically. Um, Kiki was younger and under very different circumstances. But the first 2 days after losing Starsky, I just felt like maybe he was mad at me. And I knew he wasn't. And then I think it was day 3 after losing him, I just had this sense of peace wash over. And that's how I knew he wasn't mad at me. So for those who don't know, Starsky was somewhere around 10 years old. He was a rescue, so it's hard to know exactly how old he was. But 10 to 11-ish is my best guess. He was an American foxhound, which is not a particularly common breed. So any like breed specific conditions are harder to diagnose because there's just not that many of them. And the average American foxhound lifespan is about 10 to 13. So he was at at the average lifespan for his breed. So he did have a good long life, just not as long as we always want, especially for our heart dogs, our soul dogs. Starsky had a neurological condition. We went to a neurologist, and even the neurologist was kind of stumped on him, kept calling him an enigma. All we know is it was degenerative, some sort of degenerating spine issue. It was similar to degenerative myelopathy. Um, if you know DM, it's when the dog progressively loses feeling and strength in from the back legs all the way up to the front. Um, and DM takes about 3 years from diagnosis to to kill a dog. But Starsky had his mystery quote unquote diagnosis um, for probably 4 years. It wasn't DM, but if you're familiar with DM, it looked similar to that. My priorities for Starsky were very maintenance related at this point. I just wanted to keep him as healthy as I could. We weren't going to make progress, but the hope was that we would keep him from declining. So I was trying to be better about his teeth to avoid any more plaque buildup. I was trying to be better about more consistent exercise, even if it was just a walk around the block. just to try and keep him from losing any more muscle, because that's, of course, a neurological symptom of neurological issues. And maintaining a higher muscle mass will help keep neurological issues from declining. So my priorities with him were really maintenance related. He was pretty good at adapting to his changing abilities. We did a lot of snuggling, a lot more snuggling, a lot less exercise. I stopped taking him hiking. He wasn't really enjoying it anymore. His last hike was this past summer, and he enjoyed it, but he was struggling and he didn't enjoy it the way he used to. So we kind of migrated to snifaris around the block and got him that mental stimulation and working his brain with all the sniffs, but nothing too intense on his old man bones. But even with this aging, it still did happen pretty quickly at the end. It was kind of unexpected, and it really was a shock for me, and it was a shock for a lot of you. Starsky was this kind of omnipresent being. He was a stalwart in the dog community, and he uh he was just kind of not taken for granted, but he was always there. No one expected Starsky to die. I would often say to people, Starsky is immortal, but when he dies, but that's not going to happen. I was I didn't feel like I was in denial about his mortality, but I was, more so than I realized. So, his last few days, he started showing signs that a natural death was coming, and his neurological issues started seriously progressing fairly quickly. He would always sort of have a sharp downturn, and then it would kind of plateau, and then another sharp downturn. But this time was just different, especially combined with the signs of natural death coming. So those signs were that he was sleeping constantly. And yes, he was a senior dog, so he slept a lot to begin with, but he started just sleeping constantly. The morning I put him down, he did show a change in his eating and drinking habits. He didn't really want water. He took a while to eat his food. I had to kind of convince him, and this is a food that he absolutely adored. It was a raw coated kibble, so it shouldn't have taken any convincing to get him to eat. That was definitely something. And he had this episode of extreme confusion in the middle of the night, which is also a sign of natural death. We went out because I thought he had to use the bathroom, and he just kind of stood there looking at things and didn't use the bathroom, did maybe a small pee, and then came in and he fell and he just looked up at me, and that expression on his face was kind of how I knew. He was exhausted, he was tired, and he was just kind of done. And that day and that morning, he only wanted to be in bed. Obviously dogs love the human bed, hounds love being in bed, but this it was different. He only wanted to be there. He only felt comfortable there. He was trying to get me to go to bed at like 6 p.m. so he could be in bed. It was just not like him, not like himself. His neuro issues had also been worsening. He had trouble in the past like 3 weeks, well, probably the past 2 months, with holding himself up while pooping, which he always sort of looked kind of awkward while pooping because of just the size and lankiness of his body. But he started to have real difficulty holding himself up because of, I think, balance and also lack of muscle tone. And at first it only happened like once, and then it happened like once a week, and then it started happening a lot. And in the last 3 weeks before I put him down, it was he couldn't hold himself up. It was every single time. when I took him out to poop, I put his rough wear harness on him because it had a handle, and that way I could hold him up and help him. But that, of course, affected his ability to poop. So, anyway, there's way too much detail about my dead dog's bowel movements. But this is the reason I say this is I could tell his neurological issue was worsening because he was having so much more trouble holding himself up while pooping. And he had an accident in the house while I went out and took a walk. Um, this was the day before. That wasn't like him to have an accident, but I think his tummy was a bit upset. I had missed some signs that he needed to go out and use the bathroom. So having the accident, I think, is on me, but because he couldn't hold himself up anymore while pooping and I wasn't there to hold him up, he fell in it. Um he started having significantly more falling really suddenly. I mean, he had had more in the past month, but the his last 36 hours, he fell probably I don't even know how many times. He just started falling a lot, and I noticed that his neuro issue was starting to really affect his front legs too. He It had affected his back legs for years with dragging and sort of kicking them out to the side because he didn't have good control over them. But then in the last 36 hours, he started almost kicking his front legs forward, and I could tell that he was really quickly losing feeling in his front legs as well. Um, it just I I feel weird saying that it just wasn't normal, but like then I describe these things that like could be normal for some dogs, but it just wasn't him. And he started having a lot of trouble going up the steps to my apartment, and there's 4 steps. I got a first floor apartment specifically for him, because he was starting to have trouble a year ago, and when I moved in, and in the last 36 hours, he was having a lot of trouble going up even those just 4 small steps. So it was hard. I logically have always said that when a dog is soiling itself and it can't get up the stairs on its own, that's kind of my objective, non-emotional sign that their quality of life has slipped so much that it's time to put him down. But emotionally, that decision was so much harder because he was still very much Starsky. His personality, in the past few years had mellowed, but he still had a lot of personality. He wasn't showing signs of acute pain necessarily. He was a very stoic dog, but he was also very communicative. Sometimes he would not be shy about letting me know when he was in pain. Sometimes he would hide it very, very well. So he didn't seem like he was in acute pain, but he was very clearly communicated that he was so tired, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was hiding pain. I had to start balancing, I didn't want to lose him and me not wanting to lose him with not wanting him to suffer, and balancing that was he still himself. And I really, really didn't want to let him go to the point that he wasn't himself and he was suffering. And I definitely didn't want him, I didn't want to just keep him alive selfishly because I don't know how to be without him. That's not fair to my dog, right? One of the things I said in the last day or so while I was trying to figure out was he done was this sense of dignity. And dignity is a human, this is slightly anthropomorphizing. Dignity is a human concept, but I do think it helps provide context that helps us understand in more human terms when it's time. Dignity is defined as a sense of pride in oneself, having self respect, a quality or state worthy of esteem and respect. Starsky, anyone who knew him knows he had a lot of dignity. He was very refined, stoic, just affectionate but stoic, affectionate but Velcro but independent, and just refined and something very special about him and very, you know, deserving of esteem or respect. He had a lot of dignity, and that night when he looked up at me when he fell the night before he died, he looked so helpless and like the look was almost pleading because he needed help. And he fell out of nowhere. I might have bumped him a little bit. I don't remember because it was 3 a.m. 2 months ago. But oh, now Ginsburg's coming over because I'm starting to cry. She always takes care of me when I cry. Um, he. Okay, Ginsburg. I'm okay, baby. Can you go lay down? Good girl. It was this pleading, like helpless look, and he seemed like he was losing his dignity fast and he was exhausted in a different kind of way, not just I'm really tired, I had a lot of exercise, or even I'm old exhausted. It was exhausted in a different way. Oh, I don't know how I'm going to say this part on my outline, but I stayed in the room with him. I I wouldn't imagine putting him down without being there with him. Um, and so I stayed in the room with him until he was cold. His body was cold because I couldn't bear to leave him. I didn't want him to be alone, and I didn't want it to feel surreal for me, and for him. I wanted him to know that I would always be there with him. Um, I know other people have different opinions about whether to stay in the room with their animals or not, and I respect the different opinions, but for me, I will always, always be in the room with them, and I didn't want him to be alone for his last moments. Um, and he stayed in the room until he was chilly, maybe not super cold, but chilly, and then I had them take his body away because I thought it would be easier for me once they took his body, and I almost expected him to. He was such a hardy dog. He survived so many things. I almost expected him to survive this too, and expected him to, sit up on the stretcher. And of course he didn't because he was gone. But I'm okay, Ginsburg. It's okay, honey. It's okay, baby. All right. I'm okay. I'm okay. Good girl. And after they took him away, I stayed in the room. I don't even know how long, at least a half an hour, because it was the last place I was with him. And I was just sobbing, and God bless my vet's office. They are just so incredibly kind and generous, and they told me, stay as long as you need to. And that was so helpful. And they kept coming in to check on me and giving me hugs, and they made Starsky's end of life as peaceful as it could be. That's why I chose to go to the vet, because I didn't want Ginsburg distracting us. I wanted it to be all about me and Starsky together. And I knew Starsky loved our vet and was very comfortable with him. And I didn't want a stranger to be coming to our house to put him down. I wanted it to be someone he knew. So that's why I chose the vet's office instead of an at-home euthanasia service. I do think those are great services. It just wasn't right for Starsky and me. Okay, let me dry my tears. convince Ginsburg that I'm okay, so she'll stop jumping on me while I'm recording this. I'm okay, Ginsy. All right, let's talk about Starsky's rescue story now that we've gotten the super sad part out of the way. Um, that was definitely cathartic for me to share that and share that so emotionally and freely. Thank you for listening to me. Um, so Starsky is from Empire Animal Rescue Society. They are located in Salamanca, New York, and as far as I'm concerned, they're pretty much the most responsible rescue I have ever seen or experienced, and I'm so grateful I ended up adopting from them. They're just wonderful. Starsky's Pet Finder listing is actually still up. So I want to read you a little bit of some of those. So the first thing was in his title, Starsky, best choice, all exclamation or all capitals, 3 exclamation points. Said he's house trained, awesome with kids, wonderful with cats, and really great with other dogs, exclamation point. And he was all of those things except for wonderful with cats. He was like a little too invested in cats. So he would like just bark at them a lot. He was too interested. He wasn't bad with them, but not ideal with them. Said excellent house manners and is an all-around wonderful and well-mannered dog. So true. So true. Anyone who knew Starsky knew he had excellent manners. Even when I mean he was a hound, so he was naughty, but he just, like I said, very refined dog. Crate trained and is excellent in a vehicle, not a howly or barky hound. Such a good boy. So I got Starsky in September of 2014. I had graduated college in June of 2014, and I had always wanted a golden retriever. I knew I was going to get a dog when I graduated. I actually had the opportunity to buy a very well-bred golden puppy, um, but it would have had to live with my parents for a few months before graduation, and I decided that just wasn't the best course of action for me or for the potential puppy. So, over the summer, I decided to adopt a dog instead because I decided I didn't want to potty train and that a young adult would just be better for where I was at in my life. I scrolled Pet Finder, as we do, and found a bunch of dogs and different rescues, but Starsky stuck out to me. I don't really know. I have said something about his eyes, maybe because he was a rare breed. He was listed as a treeing walker coonhound. Turned out he was an American foxhound, but they were easy to mistake for each other. And I don't know, just something about this dog. I was like, I needed to meet him. I followed up with the rescue, and they did have some concerns about me because I was young and my parents' dog. At that point, I was living with my parents, and they had just gotten their dog, and so he wasn't neutered yet. But I did talk to them on the phone, and I explained all the red flags on my application and how they weren't actually red flags. And so I got approved. So I went down to meet him, and I had to leave him because my sister was moving into college. So I couldn't bring him home for another week. And honestly, I got cold feet. Like when I met him, I loved him, but he wasn't super affectionate like right off the bat. He was very friendly, but he wasn't like a golden retriever like all over you, you know? And that made me have some cold feet. And I didn't realize, I was like, am I really going to make this huge decision? But I did take the plunge and I put a deposit down for Mr. Starsky. At that point, I thought of him as a Starsky already, so I decided not to change his name when I got him. He didn't know it super well. He knew it fine, but I could have changed his name. I just decided I already thought of him as Starsky, so I wanted to keep it. Starsky's side of his adoption story, we, the two of us, were totally meant to be. He had been in rescue for about somewhere around 6 to 9 months. I'm not exactly sure, but a while. Especially for a young dog. He was between 1 and 2, uh, probably a year and a half to 2 when I got him. He had a family that stood him up, paid the deposit and everything, and then stood him up the day they were supposed to bring him home. And then he was at an adoption event, you know, doing, advocacy for ears, his rescue, and someone tried to steal him. Like he now have someone from the rescue walk around with you when you take the dogs on a trial walk. But before they didn't, because they'd never had this issue before. And so this woman came up and she, can I walk him around the block? And then they realized he's not back. And so his foster mom, she does roller derby and she's in awesome shape. So she like ran around the block to search for him and saw him, and he's just walking along with this lady, and then she like tried to go up on a porch to like hide and be like, "No, this is my dog." And then his foster mom was like, "Give me back my dog." I'm glad this woman didn't get away with stealing my dog. And it kind of makes me sad. His he had a family stand him up. He almost got stolen. He was initially surrendered because I don't know if the baby was actually allergic, but his first owner had a new baby who was either allergic or they just didn't have time. I don't really know. And that makes me sad, especially because Starsky loved kids, loved them, and he would have been a great big brother to a baby. And that makes me sad, but at the same time, Starsky and I were just so connected and like totally meant to be. And so I'm really glad that those things did happen because they brought me my dog. So, okay, I have this sectioned into like different sections. So we're now on section 3, the timeline of Starsky's life. So, September 1st, 2014 was the day I brought him home. I had met him the week before. I was still living with my parents at that point, but I was teaching Latin up in Rochester, which was a little over an hour from my parents' house. So, in late September, early October, we moved to Rochester so I'd be closer. So, I was teaching Latin, and it was just not a good fit for me, not because of the Latin. I love Latin, but it was not a good fit for me in terms of teaching middle schoolers. So I ended up quitting at Christmas break. Um, and then I spent 2 months unemployed, as lots of recent college graduates do. I was kind of lost, and of course I was kind of lost, but Starsky he was there for me. We were lost together. It was a really, really cold winter that year. So we were spending all day together. We were spending all day together inside because it was so cold. And those 2 months we binge watched Gilmore Girls. And honestly, Gilmore Girls was always his favorite show after that. He doesn't watch TV, but he recognized the theme song, and he definitely like enjoyed and was relaxed when that show was on. And when he heard the theme song, he would come and like hang out on the couch with me. And throughout his life, that was his favorite show. And I think that's because of those 2 months we spent inside just watching Gilmore Girls together, doing nothing else except for snuggling and bonding. He had another thing like that. We were going home every single weekend, and my favorite musician, artist, singer songwriter is Ingrid Michaelson. And I go through phases where I listen to her like a normal amount, and then sometimes like I only listen to Ingrid. And he just always loved Ingrid Michaelson best of any music. And I think it's because of all the time we spent listening to her in the car, in the early days after I adopted him. And we were always heading back to my parents' house, and he loved my parents' house. So he was a big fan of Ingrid Michaelson. And so we were in Rochester, and then we moved back to my parents, and we house sat for a year for different professors going on sabbatical. So we were in 3 different houses that year. And he just moved like a champ. He never really had any adjustment periods between different houses. As long as he and I were together, we were fine. And then I went to law school. And if you know me, you know that law school was not the greatest experience for me or for Starsky. So I went to law school in New York City and we lived in Queens for 8 or 9 months. And then I moved to Brooklyn, but I still went to school in Queens. And that first year in Queens was with like the ex, the big ex in my life. He was very emotionally abusive and just a jerk, right? And he would not let Starsky sleep on the bed. And this just feels very relevant to mention because Starsky is a sweet, sweet cuddler and just an absolute sweetheart. So after my ex and I broke up, it was not a particularly amicable breakup. I decided that my dog sleeping on the bed is a deal breaker for me. If someone doesn't like dogs sleeping on the bed, then they're not the person for me because I always missed Starsky when we were living together and I missed him on the bed. And honestly, I didn't sleep as well. I obviously I slept better in terms of like not waking up in strange positions from sleeping around my dog, but I didn't I Starsky and I, we were a team. We were a match. We needed to sleep together and it always calmed me down. I think it calmed him down. We were both more relaxed when we were in bed together. So, when we broke up because we were living together, Starsky went to live with my parents for a couple months and I lived with some friends and then I went on a breakup trip to Europe and that was wonderful and Starsky did so well with my parents' dogs and at my parents. I was very lucky to have them willing to take him for an extended period of time. Um I missed him, but I'm so grateful that he was so adaptable because it meant I was able to have these experiences and I think he knew. I think he knew that I needed some those experiences. Not that he understood Charlotte's going to Europe, so I'm going to hang out here, but he was so comfortable and adaptable and but that didn't affect our relationship. And I've God, he was the perfect dog for me. Anyway, I spent 6 weeks my second summer, my 2L summer, um, in Ecuador so I could learn Spanish. Still don't speak Spanish, and I've forgotten pretty much all of what I've learned, so don't ask me. And he lived with my parents again, and again, he just did a great time. He did a great job, and he sometimes would spend exam seasons with them, a couple weeks with them while I was studying, and honestly, I wasn't actually a very good dog mom during our time in New York City. I didn't give him nearly enough mental or physical enrichment. But he just rolled with it. The most important thing was for us to be together. And when I got him out, he loved New York City because of all the smells and the street snacks on walks. And he really loved my friends and he loved that he got so much love from them. And anytime he saw them after we left, it was just the best day ever. He loved his New York City family. My 3L year, this is kind of when things changed for me and Starsky. 10 days before my third year of law school started, I was attacked. Starsky and I were on a walk. I had taken him out and it was just a beautiful day. I decided, let's just go on a walk, don't have to go to law school today. So there's not anything pressing. We have this whole day to ourselves. We can just do what we want. It's probably an hour and a half walk. Just a nice walk. Was feeling great. I was so happy and proud of myself for like overcoming the mental hurdle of like getting myself out the door. And we just had such a nice snifari walk. And on the way into our building, a man out on parole for the same crime was attacked me from behind He waited until Starsky was in the door of the foyer. There was an outside door and an inside door. And he waited until Starsky was in the inside door before he attacked me. And Starsky protected me. Um, he didn't, he wasn't able to physically protect me, but I have no doubt in my mind that he would have. He started howling like crazy. Um, Not a reactivity howling, not an anxiety or fear howling, it was a I didn't even hear it because I was trying to get away, but the neighbors came to me afterwards and said, "Yeah, we heard your dog howling so much." And then it just stopped. So we didn't think anything of it. And it turns out he was howling to get attention. And then when he knew I was okay, he just stopped and he stood at that door. It took me probably at least 20 minutes to calm down enough to go inside and get him. And I went inside with my super, so I felt safer. But I I came in and he was still standing right by the door. He hadn't moved. He was waiting for me to come get him, and he knew I would come get him. And it was a really traumatic experience, right? I mean, of course it was a traumatic experience. And this is kind of when we became like soul bonded. That's when I knew for sure. And obviously this is a trauma bond, but that doesn't make it any less deep. Um and for a week after that, maybe more, he wouldn't leave my side, was always touching me. My parents drove down that night and spent the week with me, and they went out I went out with them a couple of times, like, we went to Target and stuff to make sure I didn't become, like, a complete introvert, a recluse, and every time I came back, he would come check on me and make sure I was okay, and then one day while my parents were there, I had to go to therapy, which obviously it was a good thing that I had that therapy appointment. And so my parents and I left, and Starsky, okay, she's with you, she's safe. So I had to ride the train back from therapy by myself, which was good practice. After being attacked, everything just changed, right? And my parents got back after dropping me off from the car, and they walked in, and Starsky was apparently just very, very concerned because they walked in without me. Like, where's my girl? You're supposed to take care of her. And I just have no doubt that even though the door was in between us, he did the best he could to protect me under the circumstances. And if he had been there, I know he would have tried to protect me. I know it. He helped save my life, you know. There were a lot of people out, and his howling helped get attention. And this is when he became my true once in a lifetime soul dog. And then and then I adopted Kiki about 6 weeks after this happened. This was honestly not a good decision. Starsky was having some separation anxiety, not anything too severe, but he was lonely because I was going and spending so much time at law school because that's how things work. So he was lonely, and I wanted a second dog. I'm fundamentally a two dog home. I love having two dogs. And I was also honestly like not really in my right mind. I had just gone through this extremely traumatic experience, and I wanted a second dog, so god damn it, I was getting a second dog. And that was not a good decision, but I do think it was meant to happen. Starsky and Kiki really loved each other, and Kiki, I think, she chose us for a reason, and Starsky genuinely loved and her and was a good role model for her, and they were a good match until Kiki's severe issues started surfacing. So it was a bad decision, but I don't at all regret getting Kiki. And then in October of 2019, I put Kiki down and I moved to Colorado. These two things were unrelated with each other, had nothing to do with each other, but the optics are bad because they happened at the same time. It looks like I put my dog down because I didn't want to deal with moving her to Colorado, and that is absolutely not true, but it sort of looks like that, so I feel like I do need to explain that a little bit. And so we moved to Colorado in the end of 2019, and we had lots of adventures together, and he loved it here, and it was so good for both of us. It was a good move. It was tough. It still is tough sometimes being so far away from home, but it was so good for both me and Starsky, and it was so good for our relationship. And then in January 2023, on the 11th, he died. So we were together all in all from 2014 to 2023, which was about 8.5 years. And I just wish it was longer because he was the perfect dog. Next, I do want to share some stories about Starsky. I've obviously shared a lot of those, but I do have a few more to share. I always say that Starsky was a special dog. He was a once in a lifetime dog, a soul dog, a heart dog. But it's hard for me to know whether that actually comes across on social media. So, along with the stories in this podcast episode, as well as the stories I'm about to share with you, I hope that really shows Starsky's sweet, silly, independent, stubborn, special personality. Just such a good boy. He used to, when my sister would have meltdowns when she was, a little kid, wasn't very old, he would, come up to her and try and help her feel better. We have this one photo of her just laying on the floor decompressing, and Starsky's got his leg on her, and they're back to back. And they're just he just so cared about children and loved children so much. And that calming effect was not unique to my sister. Um, he had a calming effect on lots of other dogs. We often called him a therapy dog for other dogs because he had this remarkable calming effect. We first noticed it with Aspen, although it had happened with Kiki beforehand. Aspen is from Teton Hounds, my best friend Pam, one of my best friends, and Aspen had a very rough time of it. She is a tripod, only has 3 legs because she was caught in a bear trap and was on the run for 3 months. And Aspen is quite nervous. She's grown a lot in her confidence, and in part that's because of Starsky. She can be quite jumpy and nervous of loud noises or new places, and she just always loved Starsky. And the time that sticks out most is this one time when we were camping with Pam, and Starsky was off leash because he had a good recall. Aspen is not ever off leash, given her background of being a fugitive on the run. Um, so and Starsky was laying in a dog bed, and Aspen was on a long line, and the campfire popped, and Aspen jumped, and of course, loud sudden noise freaked her out. And instead of going to her mom, she went straight to Starsky and laid down right next to him because she felt safe with Starsky. She would sit on top of his head. I have a picture of her sitting on top of his head. She would sit on him. He knew that Aspen needed a confidence boost and needed that extra support, and he was happy to give it, and Aspen knew she could depend on him for it. And that just makes me so happy. He also, of course, was very good with Kiki, my other dog. She picked him out. She did not like other dogs. She was both aggressive and reactive. And she loved Starsky from day one. She loved Starsky. Felt totally safe and comfortable with him. She played with him. She and this is a dog who would have killed another dog. We had to be very careful when we were at my parents' house. And even then, the only dog she loved was Starsky. And it's because Starsky was special. And then there's Horatio. Horatio is a member of Four Colorado Dogs on Instagram. And Jessica, after Starsky died, said Horatio was 100% comfortable from day one with Starsky. They matched perfectly together. Thanks for always giving my boy a safe place to be. Horatio is a dog that he's a wonderful dog, but he's particular and he doesn't love other dogs. And he and Starsky just never ever had any issues. He was totally comfortable with Starsky. Atticus from Adventures of Atticus and Scout on Instagram, like same kind of deal. Nicole said when Starsky died that Starsky was the only dog that Atticus would be okay next to on the couch or walking around in the kitchen with. Atticus, again, is a lovely dog who has some difficulties and doesn't really get along that great with other dogs a lot of the time. And he never had any issues with Starsky. It, he just had this incredible calming effect on other dogs and helped them feel safe and comfortable. One story, the last one about his calming effect that I'll tell, is there is this random dog, or was this random dog in my neighborhood. And if you follow us on Instagram, you know that Starsky was a big fan of laying in the sun. I would put his orthopedic dog bed out on the patio. We have a little patio right next to a walking place. We have a very walkable neighborhood. And I had no idea this was happening because Starsky, I didn't go and check on him unless he made a noise. Um, and he never made a noise when this dog passed. So there was this random dog in the neighborhood. I have no idea what his name was. And he died a few months before Starsky. And I was walking Starsky one day, and the owner of this dog came up and said, "Hi, is your dog the one who sits on the patio in the sun?" I said, "Yeah, this is Starsky." And she said, "He's such a wonderful dog. I just lost my dog last week and he hated other dogs, but every time we passed you, he had to walk up your steps and say hi to Starsky." And she was like, he didn't like other dogs. It made no sense. But he was so comfortable around Starsky. And that's just a random dog in the neighborhood. I've never met this dog, had never met this woman. I haven't seen her a second time. I Starsky just had that effect on dogs and on people, and it just oh, such a good dog. One last story. This one is just one of my fondest memories with Starsky was when I was in law school. It was my second year in law school, and New York City had a snow day. Um, got, I don't know, like a foot and a half, something of snow. And so no class. And New York City, anyone who lives there knows it kind of shuts down when there's a big amount of snow. And so there weren't a lot of people out driving. It was, very bright because of all the white snow, and it was just snowing all day. And my sister's boyfriend was there, and obviously my sister, because she and I lived together. And so we were all spending the snow day together, and we took the dogs outside because she has a dog too. And we just let them run up and down the sidewalk of Eastern Parkway because there weren't any other dogs out, there weren't any other people out, and it was snowing, and Starsky just loved it. He got cold quickly and we went in quickly, but it was just such a nice memory of running down the sidewalk, Starsky just living his best life in New York City on a snow day. I don't know. I'm not doing it justice for the emotions I have about it, but it was such a nice memory. I guess I do have one more story I want to share, and this goes again to Starsky being a therapy dog for other dogs. I got Starsky September 1st, 2014, and Herkimer came home in around Thanksgiving, I believe Thanksgiving weekend, Thanksgiving-ish of 2014. So we'd only had Starsky. I'd only had him a couple of months at this point. And at our house in the Adirondacks, where we often spend Thanksgiving, there were bunk beds in our room. So I was sleeping on the top bunk, and my younger sister Phoebe was sleeping on the bottom bunk. And so we had just picked up this puppy, little 8-week-old Cavalier. So little Herkimer was sleeping with Phoebe, in bed with Phoebe, until my other sister, who's actually his owner, came came down the next day for her Thanksgiving break. And Phoebe woke up in the middle of the night and was like, "Oh my god, where's the puppy?" Now, because I was on the top bunk, Starsky wasn't sleeping with me. He was sleeping with Phoebe on the bottom bunk. And Phoebe woke up and like started freaking out because where's this teeny tiny little puppy gone to? And then she kind of sits up and she sees a big lump at the bottom of the bed, Starsky curled up in the scent hound swirl that every hound owner is familiar with. And she saw on top of the big lump, she saw a little swirl, and Herkimer was laying curled up on top of Starsky. And Herky and Starsky always loved each other best. I mean, that dynamic did not go away after Herky was grown up or anything. He always loved Starsky so much and would lay on top of Starsky. I have this picture of the two of them laying by the fire, and Starsky's, curled up in a chair with his head on the armrest, and Herkimer's curled up on top of him with his head on Starsky's head. And they just always got along so incredibly well. And I just love that little story of the little lump of puppy on top of the big lump of dog. That he allowed that puppy to do that. He was so tolerant, a little too tolerant sometimes. The next section of this episode, I want to share some follower comments about Starsky. Like I said before, Starsky was a stalwart in the community. He was very much a pinnacle of the community, just a pillar, that's the word I'm looking for, a pillar of the dogstagram community in general, and especially the hound dog community. And so, of course, people had a lot to say, and he was on Instagram for so long, 8.5 years. People had a lot to say when he died, and so I wanted to just share some follower comments about him. So S. Meyer 15 said Starsky and his antics helped me understand our hound better. And BK Grits, who actually did my home inspection, my home visit when I adopted Kiki, said he was such a wonderful hound ambassador. And it just makes me so happy. Hounds can be such a misunderstood breed, and they're difficult. They're a lot. And I'm just so happy he could be an ambassador for what great pets they can make, and that he was able to open people's eyes about unique qualities that hound dogs have that maybe many other breeds don't necessarily have. Carly, my co-host on With a Dog podcast and Friends with a Dog, said Starsky was actually the first other foxhound I saw on Instagram, and seeing you and him inspired me to share more about Lupin and his life. I love the hound community so much, and I love that Starsky was able to be a part of that, and we were able to be a part of that. I mentioned Pam, Aspen's mom, and she said, "Well, not my dog. Starsky's passing has been very difficult. He impacted so many. The world is a better place because of him." She's Clementine and Aspen. Oh, not Clementine and Aspen. She's Teton Hounds now. And her mom, so Aspen's grandmother, uh, Pam's mom is That's My Grand Dog on Instagram. And she said, in Alaska, the native peoples believe that the northern lights come out to welcome the dearly departed home. This was outside my window the other night, and I immediately thought of Starsky. Welcome home, boy. And Patty hadn't even ever met Starsky, and that just, all of these comments, guys, they made this that much easier. It was so hard and is so hard to not have him, and I'm so grateful for every single one of your comments. I screenshotted every single one because I never want to forget them. It made it so much easier in those first few days knowing just how loved he was. My grandpa said Starsky has gone to join his granduncles, Mike and Merlin. They may even have met their great granduncle, Jerry. Jerry lived in Brooklyn with my mother, I would guess, about 100 years ago. He was a large Airedale. My grandpa is not that old, but he likes to joke about it. I can't even think of Charlotte without thinking of Starsky and vice versa. You and him were just always linked in my minds. That's from Nat20 Hellhounds. Thank you, Kay. My friend Chelsea, she was wearing a Starsky shirt. My very first time I sold merch, she was one of the first people to buy it, and she wore it the day she heard. From Munya Kitara, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, in Uganda. She said, I started following you when it was just you and Starsky because your relationship was so special. You both carried me through quarantine and have continued to brighten my days. Starsky is magic in a small body. I'm sorry your time with him physically has come to an end, but I know he will find a way to be with you. The love is energy, so it can't just disappear. He is here and he loves you in a different way now. And I just love that sentiment so much because when people die, when dogs die, they don't they're not physically alive, but their life, quote unquote, kind of transfers to memories. And yeah, we're not going to make new memories, and that sucks. It sucks so much, but knowing that he is still here in memories, in energy, it makes me feel a lot better. Kanga and the Roo said anyone who knew Starsky knew that he was a kindred spirit to all. That's just so true. I hope that's come across in this podcast episode that Starsky was an incredibly special dog and gentle and kind and just got along with everyone and understood everyone. More than just got along with them, he understood them. He truly was a kindred spirit to all. Layla and Luke, Heather said, I do love him, and I loved every minute of knowing him. There are some dogs that just hit you different, and Starsky was one of those pups for me. And Heather hadn't even met him in person. I can only imagine. I wish she had had the opportunity to meet him in person because he was just so special. Village Dog Sen said he was such a light and force of joy. And A. Gracie J. 1529 said Starsky was my inspiration to adopt a senior foxhound. And I just cannot tell you how much these words mean to me. I just can't explain it. It means so much to me. Multiple people told me that they cried over Starsky. Ginsburg and I took a memorial hike for Starsky the day after he died, and other people shared on Instagram their hikes for Starsky, and they're still sharing their sun doggos for Starsky because Starsky loved laying in the sun. And it really, please keep sharing them. It really helps me, believe that my boy is still here on some level. I love every single picture of your dog basking in the sun, your sun doggo for Starsky. It just really warms my heart and makes me feel like he's still here. And so please don't ever stop sending those to me. And now we have come to section 6, which is how Ginsburg and I are coping with the loss of Starsky. I outlined this probably about a month ago, and it's just been really hard to get myself to record it. So some of these things aren't quite as true as they were a month ago, but Starsky Ginsburg misses Starsky more than I realized she would. At first, when I first came home, she got total zoomies. I thought that she would smell his body on me and realize what happened. that's what Starsky and my parents' dogs did when I put Kiki down. So that's what I thought would happen. But it didn't really seem to happen. But by the next day, she was having trouble settling down. She's normally really good at relaxing. Um, and she was just having a lot of trouble settling. It was kind of nutty. And honestly, she's still doing this. It's still much harder for her to relax without another dog. When we got the blanket back, I took a blanket from home for him to have the smell of home when we put him down. Um, and then the vets washed it, but hound hair does not come out for shit. um, so there's still plenty of Starsky hair in the blanket, and when I got it back, Ginsburg was snuggling with it a lot. She was specifically seeking out his scent. There was a clump of hair that I pet off of Starsky when I had given him a bath the night before he died. And one of the first nights, I think probably the second or the third night, I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and I found her laying on it. And that is a spot she would never normally sleep, so I knew she was laying on top of Starsky's fur to have his scent. She's much clingier. At first, she was asking to play a whole lot less and kind of was only drawn to a couple of toys, including the Golden Retriever toy that came home with her from her breeder. Now she's asking to play a whole lot more because she's having trouble relaxing. And I think both the not asking to play and now the asking to play a lot more are kind of grief responses. And then one thing that this little story, little anecdote kind of makes me smile and makes me believe Starsky's still here. Ginsburg, the day after he died, when we went on our memorial hike for him, she was frantic in the car. Frantic. She does not like the car, but she tolerated it with Starsky. But I had to pull over because she was going to make me crash. She was like trying to climb all over me, and now she's buckled in all the time because she can't handle the car without Starsky, apparently. So she was frantic in the car without Starsky, and I put Ingrid Michaelson on because she was Starsky's favorite, his favorite music. And I haven't even listened to Ingrid that much recently, but somehow Ginsburg knew that that was Starsky's favorite music and she settled right down. I mean, she wasn't happy to be in the car, but she was much more relaxed and it was just very calming for her. And I've got to think that she somehow knew that that was her brother's favorite music. And I would say most of her more acute grief, like seeking out his scent and being clingier and only wanting certain toys, I would say those parts of her grief had kind of faded, but she's definitely still having a lot of trouble relaxing. She definitely relaxes better with another dog around, which you wouldn't necessarily expect, but she's always had other dogs. She's always had either her litter mates or Starsky, and Starsky was such a good role model for relaxing. And as good as she is, and she's still decent at relaxing and settling, she doesn't have that, she doesn't know how to live without another dog. So it's just a new context for her to learn how to relax. And she's definitely still struggling with it, almost 2 months later. I was an absolute mess when it was happening. As I said earlier in the episode, I was just inconsolable, just having a meltdown in the vet's office. I tried very hard not to cry too much when he was still alive, but after he passed, I just let myself just be absolutely devastated. I didn't want him to be worried about me. when he was dying. So I tried not to cry, although I wasn't all that successful, and I just tried to talk to him and be as calm as I could and pet him. But after he died, I was like just inconsolable. Um that whole first day I was just I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't stop like dry heaving. I just was constantly texting my parents and Pam because I needed some emotional support. Um, the second day, I still cried a lot and still doing a lot of the texting for the emotional support, which thank you to everyone who's been so supportive because I don't know how I would have dealt with it otherwise. Um, ever since then, like I've had like kind of periodic crying. When I write about him, I cry. But also writing and talking about him is helpful, and it's helpful for processing. It reminds me of how grateful I am to have had him. So, yeah, it's kind of rough and can make me cry to talk about him, to write about him, but it's also helpful, and I don't ever want it to be feel like he wasn't here. So I'm glad that he still kind of, lives on. For a couple of days, there was this physical feeling in my chest that wasn't just emotions, it was a physical feeling. Um, I don't really have that so much anymore, but the first couple days it has happened. And just missing him, the house feels physically and emotionally empty. Like it just feels wrong, and this feeling hasn't been going away. In the last 2 weeks, it's felt less strong, which I think is Ginsburg and I kind of adjusting to this new balance, new normal. But for the longest time, and still a little now, it just feels like something big is missing. And of course, he physically was a big dog, so that's part of it. He did physically take up space, a decent amount of space, but emotionally, he was just always there and just always so supportive and kind and affectionate and just always there. And losing him has just made my home feel emotionally empty. I don't even really know if that makes sense, if I'm describing it in a way that makes sense, but I have a feeling if you've lost a dog, you'll understand what I mean by that. We have we have come up with some coping mechanisms. Moving our bodies, especially in those first few days, was so helpful. I had a lot of pent-up anxiety and grief, and Ginsburg had, quite a bit of anxiety about it. And, as Elle Woods would say, endorphins make you happy. And so exercising, even not intense exercising, just going for walks and moving our bodies helped process and relieve some of the negative feelings of grief. And we did the memorial hike the day after, and it was a hike he would have loved. He had actually done the first mile of it, but it was really hot the day I did it with him, and we didn't end up finishing. So Ginsburg and I finished it the day after he died, and that was really good. I definitely have tried to get out of our space. So Ginsburg and I we went on that hike and then going for walks more to get out of the apartment. And we took a trip to Moab and went hiking in Moab. And that was also incredibly helpful because Moab's beautiful and just a nice distraction from things going on and getting out of our space where it felt so empty without Starsky. It was good to be in a new in an Airbnb that Starsky had never been to. It didn't feel empty the same way as our apartment has felt empty. We also started spending more time with other dogs. Social for me, and it's social for Ginsburg, which I think is a part of what she's really missing with Starsky. I've also tried to do more sports and exercise for Ginsburg, done some more mushing and hiking, um, and just trying to, move our bodies. That's good for both of us. Being social and getting some work done for Ginsburg is good for her. And so that's been helpful. I have been looking. I haven't been doing this as much lately, but in the first 2 weeks, I started really looking at adoptable scent hounds and looking into fostering dogs. And it's not that I was going to get a dog, but having, like, looking at the adoptable dogs, the adoptable hound dogs kind of made me feel like, okay, at some point I am going to get another dog and I'm going to get another hound. And it kind of like, I don't want to say light at the end of the tunnel because that's not what grief is like, but looking at the other adoptable dogs reminded me that it wouldn't always feel this shitty. It reminded me of how much I love Starsky, and it wasn't going to always feel this shitty, and look at these beautiful hounds just like Starsky. And just seeing other hounds just made me really happy. I am planning on getting a Starsky tattoo, maybe two Starsky tattoos. I'm not sure exactly yet, but I that is definitely part of my grieving process that I'm planning on doing in the near future. Still hasn't happened. It's been almost 2 months and I still haven't done that yet. So that's a long-term plan. And I've kind of always wanted to do that, but him dying kind of has made me like, hell yeah, I need to get my Starsky tattoo. I want him to always be with me. I do want to give out an extra special shout out to Pam for her patience and kindness and advice and the friendship that she's shown Ginsburg and me through this. Pam has been one of my best friends for years, and she is actually the last friend that Starsky saw. We FaceTimed at the vet when I was trying to figure out whether I needed to put him down or not, and she said he just looked so tired on FaceTime. And I needed her support in that moment. And so I'm very grateful that she answered the FaceTime call. And so Starsky got to FaceTime with her and say goodbye to her and to Clementine and Aspen. And I know dogs don't understand FaceTime, but Clem and Aspen both did a hound crank when Pam said to say goodbye to their cousin. And yeah, just thank you, everyone, for all the kindness and generosity and patience you have shown me in Ginsburg, because it's meant the world, and it's also made it that much easier. It's made it so much easier. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. I hope that this episode has helped me convey just how special Starsky is. He is a special dog, right? I don't like the past tense, and for the first 2 weeks, I wouldn't even use the past tense with Starsky, because I like to think that loved ones are always with us, even if it's through memories and not with us physically. But I hope this kind of helped you get to know Starsky a bit more deeply and understand why he is so special and why I love him so much. Um, I do want to give you a little homework assignment. I want you to take professional photos with your dog this year, at least once. If you can't take professional photos, because I do understand that's a privilege that not everyone has, I want you to get a friend or even get a tripod and do it yourself. Take some photos together with your dog. I have so many photos with Starsky, me and Starsky, and I'm just so grateful for all the photos we have together. I had about 36 hours when he started declining to when he died, and I didn't end up having enough time to do a final photo shoot. Sometimes you just don't have time. Most of that 36 hours was taking care of him and worrying about him and trying to figure out if he was telling me it was his time. And I'm so grateful that I have all these photos, because I didn't have time for an end of life photo shoot. And so your homework is to get photos together with your dog this year. Preferably professional photos because there is just something special about those. But if that's not feasible for you, just make sure you take some photos together, you and your dog this year. You never know when something can happen to them, and you'll never, ever regret having photos with your dogs. So that's your homework. And just real quick at the end, I do want to mention a couple of resources if you're also struggling with having a senior dog, knowing when to put your dog down, or just if you want to gain more insight into this topic. This is something that affects every dog owner at one point or another, and so I just want to share a few resources that have helped me with it. So my first recommendation is Urban Paw Vet. They are in Denver, and I cannot ask for a more kind, generous, caring vet. They're wonderful. They do rehab right in house. They have a rehab veterinarian and lots of rehab equipment right there. Starsky hated the vet. He hated going to the vet, and he didn't hate going to Urban Paw. He actually enjoyed it. They're just so incredibly kind and understanding, and I cannot say enough good things about them. If you are in Denver, really consider going to Urban Paw Vet. As long as I live here, that's where I'll be taking my dogs. I also want to recommend the Instagram account Senior Dog Doc. She has a lot of wonderful resources for owners of senior dogs and knowing when it's time, and even just how you can make your senior dog's life more comfortable. And then I also want to recommend the Golden Ratio podcast. The Golden Ratio is a account of golden retrievers. Most of them are rescue golden retrievers, and the Golden Ratio mom, her name is Jen, and she really likes taking in older goldens and goldens with unique medical issues. She's really good at medical care and rehab for dogs with extra special needs. She, because she takes in these older dogs, has lost quite a few dogs. And they do a podcast, the Golden Ratio podcast, and their episodes about Riley, Maggie, and Queso have been helpful. Even listening to them afterwards have been helpful and validating. She really goes into the balance of how you know when it's too far and how much she doesn't want her dogs to suffer. She admits that she let Riley go too long, and he, because she was selfish and wanted her boy, he was a very special once in a lifetime dog for her, and she has some regrets over how long she let him go, and that episode is incredibly helpful for realizing the balance of when it's time. And so anyone with a senior dog, especially a senior dog who's on the decline, I would really recommend listening to the Golden Ratio podcast episodes about Riley, Maggie, and Queso. I'm sure the other ones are good as well, but those are the ones I've listened to. Thank you so much for letting me tell Starsky's story. I am just so grateful for all of you. I hope this has helped you get to know Starsky a little better, and Ginsburg and I will see you on the next FWAD episode. Love you guys.